This panel is going to extend the conversation about WebVR, mobile VR, social VR. The words that people use to describe where this is going are still in flux. There's no kind of catch-all term, and everybody who's on this panel will represent in some way some part of either the timeline or of the technology or of the philosophy behind it, which is essentially what I tried to put together. Hey, Jai, how's it going? So I will introduce these gentlemen, and maybe I'll allow you guys to extend it a little bit. On the far left is Jai Krishnan, who is here from Google in Palo. Where are you guys? Where's your office?
Mountain View.
Mountain View, yeah. So he is with the department that is building Google Draco technology, which is a compression scheme for WebGL, for objects in WebGL, right?
Yeah.
You'll refine that. Which means that when you try to put 3D objects into WebVR, they might be really clunky, and this is a way to optimize them and make that leaner, faster, better, and prettier. James McCrae is the co-founder of JanusVR, beloved around the world, has a wide open sort of philosophy about where the tech should go and how it should be used. You met his colleague, Dr. Keram, just before this. Eduardo Cuervo, I poached from the ACM conference that was going on in Buffalo yesterday when he asked me for a good keynote from Toronto, and I sent him Dr. Keram Singh. I said, I'll make you a trade. I'll send you one of our best, and I'm going to bring you up here and introduce you to the Toronto crowd. And Eduardo's with Microsoft Research, is a senior researcher there who's working with a mobile cloud VR, what order do you put the words in?
Cloud-powered VR.
Cloud-powered VR. So that's interesting. It's all being processed in the cloud. Azure, or where is it? What do you guys call your cloud?
Azure, I'm using Expo Live.
Oh, interesting. And Bernie Roehl is like the uncle of the VR community that everybody loves. He always brings extra chocolates.
Not the creepy uncle.
No. The guy that brings the box of chocolates. But oh no, that sounds even creepier. He's the guy that everybody loves. Bernie's been around this racket for a long time, decades. He was at there in the early days of VRML. And so that's a whole other era for attempting to get VR portable and between us. And so I'm sure you'll have some interesting insight into where it was and where it's going to go and what you think about that. Now, my hope is that between all of you, we're not just making a presentation, but we're working together to really figure out how to synthesize all the research that you guys are doing separately and create something new or better or faster or where we differentiate in our opinion. Sound good?
Great.
Okay. So let's just, I'm going to throw it out and you pick it up if you have it, okay? Where is the WebVR today and what is the problem with it?
I can talk about WebVR pedantically first. WebVR actually gets like collectively called this sort of blanket for whenever people consider, virtual reality and bringing the web together. As shown in the previous presentation, rather, we've been calling it the immersive internet to avoid the ambiguity. WebVR is the result of a consortium or a collection of companies, individuals coming together to define an experimental API whereby you can write JavaScript that allows you to, in a browser, with a supporting browser rather, interface with the VR hardware directly. So, an early problem when VR hardware first arrived on the scene in this latest generation was, how do you get this in the browser? And that's sort of that first fundamental step. It's very much the underpinnings of just getting going with it.
One of the really interesting questions is, do we run VR inside a web browser, or do we run web browsers inside VR, if you know what I mean? So you can either go into a VR world and have a web browser there, which may launch experiences from it, Or do you do the other way around and have a web browser and occasionally put on your VR headset when you come to a VR-enabled web page? So I think both of them are valid, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on which is going to be the predominant form.
Okay.
You have an opinion.
Yeah. Oh, I'm open to that. I'm free to jump in on it. Okay. So I mean, yeah, I'm very much on one side of that spectrum there. I'm of the belief that we've had the document model of that paradigm of browsing the web in that way, and I mean that was its first incarnation. I think the web's original purpose was going to be this great encyclopedia of documents and bring all the world's knowledge together, but in a text-based way. And it's great as a transmission medium. Text, and of course, is very valuable, so it's been so important to us and evolved. But I'm very much, I came from a research lab, and I'm very much in sort of looking towards experimenting and trying to really disrupt, a 20, 25-year-old model we've had for browsing the web and just considering it discrete jumps between a series of documents and, sort of looking at new representations of the web, meaning maybe spatialize them, and interactions with the web. So I'm extremely excited to be, exploring the role of VR hardware and as it relates to our interacting with media into the future and what the web will be used for. Because as we've seen between Web 1.0 and 2.0, it started as this repository for knowledge and has evolved into something that's driving, billion-dollar businesses and beyond. So, category 2, I forget the order here.
The other way of looking at it, the question is, are you living in a VR experience and within there browsing the web, or are you living on the web and occasionally having VR experiences through it? And I think that's a really interesting question. You and I had a conversation earlier on. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm looking at that. Or, sure.
It's an interesting point about, it was great, by the way, to see the presentation just before this one, to sort of see what perspectives could exist in a new incarnation of the web. And I think there are two parts of it. One is, at a broad level, the sort of nuts and bolts of like, what are we talking about? What types of interactions? What's switching? Which is, I think, the discussion Bernie and I had before. And I'm certainly in the both and camp there. That there's creating experiences where you can sort of live within a headset world and experience the web that way, and sort of other applications and move back and forth. Sort of have that be a new computing platform at the same time that you have VR experiences on a website, and then have different interactions based on what device you are using. So that would be, if I have a headset, I'm getting sort of the fullest version of that interaction, but then if I'm on a 2D desktop, then I'm sort of still getting an interaction. Basically, a principle that guides most of the only principle that sort of slows us down for the most part is don't break the web. And I think that applies in this case as well, right? Like, how do you have an experience that still works when people are browsing the web in sort of the traditional way? And so taking a step back for me, I think of this question of, as we have this new environment, possibly multiple new environments with VR and AR, etc. And we want to have principles for the web carry through, and that includes don't break the web, but also have something that's searchable, have something that's open, have something that's secure. Can you carry those principles through while creating brand new experiences? And I think that's really what I think all of us are searching for, right? We want to be able to have the experience of, run and jump through portal holes and end up at a new website, and have that be, sort of an HTML link, and then have that carry through to the same principles that have existed. And the extent to which we can create something like that while not having to rebuild the web from scratch, I think would be a great success.
I would like to comment that I believe that we are in a very interesting moment right now, because so there's a lot of enthusiasm about VR, but VR headsets haven't reached really a critical mass yet. So it's the point where we need to define or create compelling experiences and kind of like the killer app that will make someone that has never used VR go and buy a headset and do this. So we need to think about what do we really want to provide that is so much better than what we can just get in a monitor, that will make people get into this. And whether this is going to be a browser within VR or VR within the browser, it's really I believe it's dependent on what kind of experiences we can give. And as Jay was saying, we need to do this in a gradual way, so such that we don't break the web, but at the same time we provide some significant value added so that we can convince early adopters to jump in?
I think for me the killer app, and I've come to this conclusion fairly recently, I would say, is social. Because I think when people go into VR, they expect to find other people there. If you talk to people who are not in the industry, people who are not at this show, just regular people, and you talk to them about what their expectations are for VR, what they describe is always a social experience. Whether it's because it's shaped by the holodeck or Ready Player One or whatever, their expectation coming in is they'll be there with other people. So I think for me, social is definitely the killer app. People will keep coming back for other people.
Eduardo, I find it a little weird that you're looking for the killer app at Microsoft. I know that you're not the other Microsoft, you're the research, but Microsoft this summer, I already am getting my free Acer headset from going to the Vision Summit. There's like Lenovo and HP and Acer, they're all releasing these mixed reality headsets so that I can do Windows in VR. What more of a killer app do I need? I mean, I'm just going to use Windows in VR because that's how I do it now, right? Do I still need Sonic the Hedgehog in order to make that true?
So that's an interesting question, and I don't expect people to just go and do right now at least their normal Windows activities in VR. And this is mostly because at this point, like VR headsets don't have the kind of resolution you need to read text at a fine degree as you can in a monitor, right? So probably at this point, what you can do with VR is kind of a different experience. Of course, Mac is heavily invested in both VR mixed reality, but I don't think the intention right now is for you to go and use Excel or use PowerPoint within the VR headset. I think really like it's pretty much like the first generation of VR. And if we want to get really a broad adoption, we need to have a set of killer applications that give us much more value to the VR headset than what we just can get using the monitor.
Well, and let's go into that. So what might a killer app look like? Because Janus is cool and all, but most people don't want to go bounce around with a bunch of Sonic Hedgehogs that are doing the Watusi in weird, freaky worlds. So how are you going to bring that down to the mass adoption and make that something that people actually want to use, a killer app?
So I could talk so much. One thing I think that you would enjoy if you spent a little more time in the Sonic the Hedgehog and all that stuff you're saying, wacky stuff. But
hey, I'm not judging. I'm just pointing it out.
And actually, the question of a killer application presumes that it's an application in some really constrained sense, like that it serves a specific vertical, or there's really some really narrowly focused thing, that a really refined but focused sort of purpose for it. And that sort of thing fits well into app stores and everything. But with Janus and my own belief, it's sort of my life's work and passion that what I'm working on is, or has the potential to be, this thing, because it can mean so many different things to so many different people. It's that adaptability or that general purpose that it serves in some parts. There's issues of security, data transmission, and social. I like to joke that if it was really a dedicated social app, at least I'd put the two faces looking at each other on the logo. Kind of a dumb joke, but anyway.
Yeah, point taken. So, but then you agree in a way that there is not necessarily a need for a killer app, but rather open source, outward-facing, use it for whatever you feel.
I think that there's a ton of potential applications for virtual reality that don't appropriately fit into the App Store model that Oculus and HTC with Valve. I have tons of people who come up to me saying I do content production, or I have 360 videos or something, but maybe I'm not necessarily interested in hosting that content on Facebook in particular, say, and I kind of want to be in control. Or is there some kind of general purpose platform or somewhere? Can I be in control of my data? Can it live anywhere? And that's also just something that we provide. We provide a choice. We provide that freedom for people to mash and place content on the web anywhere. But I actually think that it's that ubiquity being available on all devices, those devices finally coming down in price point and becoming a bigger thing, and it's just going to continue. And the cases will be emergent. It'll just be something that gains in steam. That's my...
I don't know why the phrase Facebook killed the internet star just came to my mind. But that, when you get into that kind of a funnel, that sort of content funnel, there's also an interest. I'm not harshing on anybody, but is there a benefit to something like AltSpace Project Sansar or these other sort of more on rails worlds where a lot of the hard work is done for you, and you're really just, to Bernie's point, just get to the social part, you know? I don't want to have to craft it. So yeah, if you look at World of Warcraft, if you look at Second Life, these things have extremely rich, almost religious kind of cultures around them because people are spending time doing things in them and not making the thing that allows you to do things in them. But Jai and Eduardo, and even Bernie, and well, all of you, I suppose, but you're working on solutions for building the very infrastructure upon which the platforms are built, right? So let's just change from philosophical, just for a second, we can get back to it, towards what do we see coming in the near future that's going to accelerate this and its adoption and its viability in a real sense?
Well, certainly better hardware. That's the first thing. Headsets that are higher resolution, lighter weight, lower cost, wider field of view. I mean, that'll happen by itself. From our standpoint, what I think we need is to enable performant worlds above all else. And I think both of you guys are working on different aspects of that. So I mean, Microsoft, you're working on cloud-based rendering, essentially, and you're working on really efficient ways of compressing 3D data. So I think on this panel, we have a lot of the solutions coming together, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the idea of what we're building relates actually to the philosophical question you were asking earlier, right? Which is, you know, a killer app is great if your goal is to build the ecosystem or have more people available, but that in itself is a step in order to get the critical mass for more development, better infrastructure tools, you know, a wider pool in which people are building experiences. I think the experiences are really what we're targeting, right? Like we're ultimately trying to get to, you know, a place where there's tons of great things available in this space. And the killer app is sort of a way to get there, and I think the infrastructure is also sort of a way to get there, right? If you build the tools that make it available so that you know, you don't have to spend a lot on compute because you're taking advantage of it from a cloud perspective, or in our case, if you're compressing down your content so you're not using as much and you get to squeeze a little bit more performance out of your existing hardware. All of that to me is ways of saying, okay, we're enabling more capabilities, and then there's sort of teaching tools that go with that to say, okay, now it's easier than ever to take advantage of these wonderful technologies. And you know, that last step of sort of asking people to be creative in that space is, I think, what people do naturally, right? So that's the part I'm least worried about.
Yeah, I agree it's important to make the infrastructure much better, to make adoption go wider. So right now we are at a risky point in VR because VR is getting a lot of adoption because finally it is just good enough to not make people feel sick, to make people enjoy the experience, right? So we're at a risky point where like, people may again say like, this is not quite good, I don't like it. So we need to make sure that we can deliver soon high resolution experiences in which people, for example, can read text, can be closer to matching their natural vision, where they can feel more immersed and can stay longer in these VR experiences, like let's say more than 10 minutes without feeling dizzy. So I think it's very important to develop infrastructure that can give you a responsive VR experience, a high quality VR experience, and something that you can use while you're anywhere for more than, let's say, 20, 30 minutes. So I think all of that is very important for people to feel confident on the technology and really adopt it.
You guys are still talking high level, though. What are you doing, Google? What are you doing with this stuff to make it better and faster? How is Draco going to solve this problem?
Sure. Yeah, I think in terms of specifics, let's see. There's a long list of things, so I'm thinking about how to best structure it. I think there's sort of three areas I talk about. One is sort of the daydream, sort of built off of Android type world, right? Where we're talking about headsets, we're talking about you know, essentially an OS and being able to work off of existing devices like Pixel phones and sort of the very latest generation that have the very best hardware to say, okay, here's a sort of world that we'll define of devices that are capable of doing really high quality playback, and we'll give you tools in order to actually develop in this space. The part that I'm maybe even more interested in is the WebVR side, which we're sort of developing through Chrome, to actually have tools that are essentially built on top of sort of familiar parts, WebGL, JavaScript, and to take those and sort of address the two parts that we talked about earlier about how to sort of build a browser within VR and how to have those browser experiences essentially fall back so that you can still play them back in these 2D worlds. The part that I'm actually involved in is the compression side. So on Draco, we essentially take the content that you have in the synthetic world, the meshes, the actual sort of like core connections between data points and the vertices and edges, and compress that data down. And what that does is it makes two things happen. One, it's makes storage a lot easier, but two, it starts to move us to a streaming world instead of a storage world. And I think that's something that's really critical for having a web experience with VR, because you can't have a situation where your load times take forever, or you're making a huge commitment when you decide to go into a VR experience, right? If every jump in a portal means that you're going to have to stop and wait for it to load, then you're not going to have the portal experience, right? Ultimately, what you're going to have is sort of these really slow, unacceptable experiences, not the freeness that you want. And so really, when we're talking about compressing things down, we're talking about making it more accessible on weaker networks, but also increasing the speed so that you don't have to worry about sort of the latency requirements. And we do that with sort of all the types of media content you can ask for, right? The talk earlier today I gave was on Draco, on audio, on video, on still images. So we're really trying to get the entire part of the ecosystem so that really no matter what type of sort of new experience you're developing, you're getting it compressed as small as possible, and you're getting it to load as fast as possible.
Yeah, compression and data transmission is certainly an important topic. Not just for the experiences themselves, but even on the social side as well. And how do you get, the constant question is like, how do you get maybe 100 or 1,000 users, concurrently in a single space together and communicating and interacting? And what are the strategies to kind of mitigate, using all this bandwidth, and what can you do? Fortunately, we live in an era, though, where there's always a Wi-Fi signal close by, and bandwidth is improving. In Janus, the experiences that we have, there's a lot of techniques that you can do with regards to progressively loading things in, levels of details of things like that, so that you can ensure a reasonably good experience, so that that content that's kind of as you're experiencing it, it's both sort of coming in and first low fidelity, or object by object. That kind of thing can be had, and I actually enjoy that seamless ability to traverse. That there isn't kind of like a click and then you wait and a bar scrolls on by or something like that. That you're always engaged in the experience. It's funny. I just wanted the point made before. It's going to sit there and fester. But it was about like the web and about search, and I'm of two minds on this. And many think I'm wearing a VR headset, but I just want to efficiently search for something as quickly as possible, get to it, and get all of the extras out of the way. And I'm totally of two minds on this. There's a whole separate, more artistic side, creative side of my brain that wants that meandering and just random discovery and exploring through space that spatialization provides. It sort of keeps the fun in comp sci and graphics for me to think of things like that and allow that kind of creativity and discovery to happen. Obviously, when you want to go from A to B, you look up something on a map and that's what you're interested in. But I think there's equally that curiosity to explore. So.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear about the compression technology, because obviously I'm a developer, and obviously one of the issues is download sizes, but the other is performance. And one of the issues I run into with WebVR is it's still not anywhere near as performant as something written in Unity or Unreal, and it's a really significant difference. Web browsers were not originally made to deliver VR content. They're getting better at it, but that wasn't the original purpose. Just like mobile phones weren't originally designed for VR. We can use them for that, put them in a plastic frame, and it works. But I think we need to have fairly specialized hardware and software to really get the kind of performance we need. Because right now, if I look at doing WebVR, I'm going, wow, it's really limiting in performance. Trying doing mobile VR, very limiting in performance because of the limited GPU and CPU. Trying to do WebVR on mobile is painful. It's really painful. So as a developer, I still, even though I was involved with VRML back in the day, I still am a Unity developer right now because it's just too difficult to get something that looks good and runs well and doesn't overheat your phone and doesn't burn out your battery. It's a challenge.
I feel like, Eduardo, Microsoft in the cloud might have something to say about that.
Yeah, so and that's related to what I was discussing in my talk today in the morning. So if you think about what's going to happen in the next couple of years, you will see very high resolution displays in HMDs, and you will see higher frame rates, and you will see even fancier graphics, right? And you will want to do this in a mobile device. And the problem is that desktops right now are struggling to keep up just with this resolution. So what's going to happen? You're going to wear something like this in your head, it's probably going to fry your ears, right? So we really need to think about how can we support this kind of requirement in a mobile device. So what I am working in my group with this is maybe we can do some collaboration between what the mobile device can do and give it some help from the cloud. And this is challenging because the cloud is not nearby, right? So we will have some latency going there. So my work has been mostly on how do we make it look like as if the cloud was near to us? How do we hide this latency? How do we make it look good? But also, it's important to make this be cheap, right? Because cloud resources, especially GPU, are not cheap. So how do we make this cost effective? So this is kind of like the work I am doing. This effort in doing collaborative rendering, collaborative VR worlds in a power efficient, resource efficient, and performance efficient way. I think this is a very important problem, and it's something that really has to be solved in the next few years to support high quality mobile VR.
That's the thing that VR adds that nothing else has added, is you're strapping it to your head and there can be no latency or it will make you physically sick.
Yes.
That's an incredible challenge, and it's why, again, I brought you guys together, because I don't know how you you have to be predictive somehow. You have to, as VR already is, it's sort of guessing if your head's moving this way, probably 9 frames from now it will be there, therefore render those frames early. Is it that kind of research that you're doing with the cloud?
Yes. So if you look at the movement you can have in VR, your movement is always going to be limited by the kinematics of your body, right? So your neck can just rotate a certain number of degrees and can go to a certain speed and acceleration, the same your arms and your legs. So you can build, for doing this in the cloud, you only need to hide about 80 milliseconds of latency. So as long as you can predict ahead of time just 60 to 80 milliseconds of movement, you are good enough. You can do a speculative execution. You can run in advance, guessing what the user is going to do, render it in advance, and send it. And well, the only challenge is when you mispredict, you need to somehow fix it. Fortunately, there are computer graphics techniques that allow you to fix at the last second what you send to make it look almost as what you intend, as what the user wanted to see. So yeah, there is a lot of active research going, not only in Microsoft research, but in academia in general, and also in industry on making this problem work. So also people at Oculus, people at HTC, and people at Valve are doing work in this area.
Oh my God, I love this subject, this sort of predictive, near future, just in time kind of stuff. I mean, it takes it beyond even WebVR, but the challenge is an extremely cool one because it puts us there, doesn't it?
And the improvements in machine learning are so vast over the last couple of years with deep neural networks that you can actually do much better models and much accurate predictions now. So I think this is a very exciting time for working on this area.
Right. Now, I'm a big fan of your research work, and I think it's very exciting. I do worry about one thing, which is as we move to higher resolution headsets, the amount of data you need to transfer becomes substantial. So how are you addressing that?
So that's a good question. There are also some ways in which we can address that. So for once, something that is important about VR headsets and about human perception is that our visual acuity is not uniform across all our field of view, right? So we can, for example, when we are sending this kind of video frame, we can say, give more detail to the center, what your pupils are, and this is where eye tracking comes in hand. And maybe the stuff in the periphery, we can just give lower detail. And you are unlikely to notice. Also, when you are moving fast, your acuity also drops down. So you can take all these observations to drop quality when you are unlikely to notice it. Mm-hmm. And something else you can do is that, for example, other thing that we were working on is you can do a low detail version or maybe a slower version of the application or the game in the mobile phone and just supplement the missing details or the missing frames from the server and save a lot of bandwidth by doing so.
Does anybody not understand what we're talking about? Can I have a show of hands? Who understands this
Are
topic?
we getting too techie?
Cool. Are we good?
Are those who understand or don't? Do, okay.
Cool. So let's keep going on there. I'd like to know, James, what does Janus do to mitigate these problems? Do you care? I mean, respectfully, do you care about these problems?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a few points. Well, obviously, one, I care very highly about having a highly performant experience. Historically, I mean, Janus was a native client for a reason, and I developed it this way because, there was no WebVR alternative at all at the time, and, he mentioned sort of intrinsics with browsers only wanting to refresh at 60 when the headset is 90 and whatever other issues. So it's sort of a homegrown solution. It was a browser built from scratch targeting, the Rift at the time that was going to run at its, internal rate and be highly performant. So, it was a sort of from scratch approach as opposed to, trying to retrofit, VR support into an existing browser. The second thing is trying to offer performance guarantees is a bit of a plight because you're opening up your users' creative possibilities to literally build anything they want. So if they're disrespectful of those performance constraints, they write a complex shader or a room with 10 million polygons or something, and you have the best.
5 errors.
2 is good though. Yeah, but So I don't know. I can. Yeah. Sounds like a challenge. Anyway, no. But So that's just to say is. There are architectural things that you can do in your engine to kind of mitigate that in terms of like queuing up graphics commands and things like that, so that your one thread isn't kind of halting doing processing. The other graphics can continue to update to the HMD on a set. You said I could go a little technical, so.
Rocket.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So you can re-architect your software in that way, and I think that Chrome they're actually working on exactly that right now to do the same, to offer that frame rate guarantee and have it non-blocking, but. That's actually the one thing holding us back from getting on the Oculus-specific platform right now, where we're on some of these other platforms. That's an aside.
But by God, that's a whole other level that it's like being a Windows user. I mean, are they using Chrome? Are they using Firefox? That's a whole other level of headache, that you're not having your own platform. You're not guaranteeing what even the delivery method is for your work.
Oh, I've already thrown that out the window. Like, we have builds for Windows OS X and Linux. You can get it through Steam. Now we have by the way, I love WebVR. I totally love WebVR. Big hug for WebVR and everyone working on that too. So we have a WebVR enabled client, works through Chrome, and it works great on Android, and that's what we're definitely rocking when we show that. Such a great solution for mobile, almost like turnkey in that sense. But targeting all these platforms, where we come at is what we want to allow someone to author content that can live on the web and has no sort of central control or authority. You're in control of your files. You have the freedom and flexibility to put your content where you want, but there's no issue of disappearing, and it'll always be there. But in terms of guaranteeing, you want those experiences wherever they're authored to kind of work the same way on all the devices. So a goal for us is like complete hardware ubiquity, and that just doesn't mean like desktop and mobile, but even thinking not just VR headsets but AR headsets of the future, and trying to manage all of that is tricky for a startup.
And you and Dr. Singh are doing some of that work, but then you've got this like army of people that you're sort of open sourcing it to help you create that solution.
We've been very super fortunate to, I think, you just create something you think someone will love, or just give them power, and then it'll kind of return to you. So like, there's actually components of the platform. The platform has all these pieces. Some of them are just like open source or community contributions, and they're MIT licensed or whatever. And then we continue that tradition and we maintain them and we kind of continue it that way. So like, we have something called Presence Server. So in Janus, you can go to an environment or like a page that becomes a space, but you can socialize and meet someone else there. So if they're present. So we do our meetings in Janus. It has that social component, but all like open source on GitHub right now. You can check it out, contribute, and all of that. Extend it, roll your own server, add your own rules, make everyone look like some really particular avatar, whatever. Mm-hmm. So.
David Smith, who talked early this morning, his whole like life's work right now is about doing that within VR and debugging it within VR, and modifying the code on the fly within VR, and maybe he should have been on this panel too. But anyway, that's David. You are with us in spirit. It'll be an interesting dinner conversation, I'm sure, between all this. So I've got, how many minutes have I got left? I got 15 minutes. You guys tell me, how do we use the next 15 minutes to move this forward?
I was just gonna riff on the last thing you just said on interactively like modifying code and content. Such great like educational possibilities there. Like, you know, when I learned programming on a 386, it was pretty cryptic, and you hit this key and the things run. But now we've gotten it's so very much more visual and sort of rewarding. It's like now you're a wizard who can conjure cubes and make them oscillate sinusoidally and stuff, and just kind of do some recipes on the side that affect that. It's so like compelling and engaging, and seeing examples of that, I think that's great.
Just building on that, I think giving people tools to create their own content, because there's a real content bottleneck in VR. Big content developers don't want to put the money in until there's a market. There's not going to be a market until there's content. So enabling users, as you do already in Janus, obviously, and many other systems do as well, is key. So that someone can go in there who's not necessarily a technical person and be able to create interesting, compelling worlds that other people can enjoy. I think that's a really big, important part of it.
What do you guys think about something like Project Sansar, where the world is kind of, the beautiful pieces are there for you, and it's more about making you craft things within that, picking up the Lego pieces, assembling them, selling those things. Do you care about that world at all?
I've hung out with Philip Rosedale in there a few times, actually.
You're thinking of High Fidelity.
No, it's
Was
both.
that formerly
They're
called
both.
Project?
Formerly both, but Philip is High Fidelity. Sansar is actually Linden Labs, where Philip used to work, right?
It's close enough, Bernie. Give him a break.
So I'll stop right there.
It's a little inside baseball, sorry.
Apologies, yeah, I mixed the two up. I thought that was the working title for it, but are you referring to Sansar? I mean,
Am I a fan of Sansar?
No, you were referring to like.
I'm referring to Sansar. Yeah, I'm referring to like beautifully pre-crafted pieces where you have a currency and a society, and.
I think that the idea of trying to form an economy or marketplace that drives people there is very admirable and actually really great, and it's actually proven quite successful with Second Life that's come before it. I kind of disagree from a philosophical standpoint on the sort of the closed garden way of, it's on their server and they're kind of in.
Or Facebook Spaces.
Okay, yeah.
Different thing, same thing?
I don't want to single, anyway. So, yeah, but just to say that I think that you could actually have things like that, but you could use sort of, more decentralized systems. So, one thing we would love to explore in time are virtual economies that are, blockchain or Bitcoin driven, things like that. The decentralized distribution of files themselves. So right now we already support IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, through sort of HTTP like ends. And that's also really cool, just the distribution, and also that's reliant on blockchain too. So there are all these great technologies out there to grab, and I guess different individuals and organizations have different strategies on how they might inspire or create a marketplace. So
I'm just pointing at Eduardo because did blockchain make you go off just now? Like, how do you guys feel about blockchain and the cloud and getting stuff just in time to the end user?
So I saw that question when we were discussing the panel. To be honest, I don't see the connection between blockchain and VR at this point. I think it's going to be very important for all kinds of security and transactions, and I guess more like for commerce. I think it's going to be very important, but I do fail to see the connection with VR at this point.
Well, it's about connecting everything.
It is, and also we mentioned Philip Rosedale. He is very big into the idea of using blockchain for guaranteed identity in VR.
Are you who you say you are while I transact with you in this space, which we are agreeing to as a meeting place, to go beyond just waving at each other in our Sonic costume, but doing things, right? Isn't that sort of where we're trying to head with all of this? That I can kind of transact in the real world or in the fake world or whatever we want to call it and make things actually happen. I do that with Amazon. Amazon knows me. I get on there, it says, you probably will like this. I said, great, let's try it. It's at my house in an hour. So we want to do that in WebVR eventually, don't we?
If you're not relying on some, central authority to dictate who's who, then you need to maybe go with some sort of distributed, peer-reviewed sort of system like that.
That's the beauty of blockchain.
right? So it's the next logical choice.
Jai, what do you want to say about what's next for you?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think there's a helpful framework that I'm using to think about both the path that Google has kind of been plugging away on versus sort of what we heard on the panel. And that's, there's sort of this very traditional model, I think, of what it is that starts to get a new ecosystem built, right? And one of the things I think we've assumed to some extent is that hardware kind of naturally moves forward. And that's generally true, but I think it's, I've been at Google for about 2 years now, so I'm sort of just at the point where my viewpoint has shifted to where a company Google size starts to have an influence on the direction of hardware development, right? Like if YouTube puts out a new requirement about what needs to be in place in hardware decoders for video for a YouTube certified TV or device, that actually moves the market pretty quickly. It's about a 2-year period and then it's in. And that's a remarkable amount of power and something I'm still getting used to. But what it means, I think, for the VR scape is that and going back to sort of this killer app idea, there could be eventually a player in the VR space that's significant enough where it starts to move the hardware in a given direction, and then it starts to coalesce things a little bit more. And the elements for that ultimately end up, or in today's world, have been financial, right? Like YouTube at the end of the day is both large enough in terms of scope of delivery, but also it makes enough money for creators that it justifies more content, which then sort of fueled its size, and et cetera. And so when I think about sort of like, is VR going to get to that point, it makes me think, is there going to be sort of a commercial environment that really hits that scale, right? And so a lot of sort of like closed garden environments and things like that don't really end up approaching that scale. And so that, I think they sort of end up going a different direction. But all of that is predicated on saying that VR and AR are going to continue the same technology development model that we've seen from video. And I think what we're seeing in the panel is a possibility that model may need to be completely iterated or completely radically changed. And that's super exciting to me, but it's obviously much harder to predict, right? And so having an open environment where it isn't all about sort of commerce development and one or few large companies that sort of guide the marketplace, I think that would be really exciting to see. I'm hoping that our web development with WebVR is open enough that it ends up supporting those outcomes without sort of predefining one way or the other. But right now, I think what we're trying to do with WebVR is sort of hedge for both in a way. And that's what you see with sort of these like large infrastructure projects, right? Like the Draco works for WebVR, but it could be picked up by anyone and put into any environment, and it could work in a variety of places. And I think what we're hoping to see is which direction that goes, or whether sort of these new interactions between how hardware environments and browsers and content manufacturers, whether we get a totally new interaction that we haven't seen before. So that's sort of what I'm hoping for.
Are we all going to seem a little silly and naive in a year because of what Apple drops 6 months from now, or not happening?
No.
Interesting, isn't it? For the first time, it's like, I'm not so sure I'm worried about it. It's a very on-rails technology, like hardware, and I don't know. I think maybe this is going in the opposite direction, in the opposite philosophy, and that's why it's dangerous and interesting. Comments on that at all?
Yeah, no, I agree.
I mean, if you go to events like SIGGRAPH and stuff, you'll actually probably see some of that experimental hardware and light field technologies and, like waveguides and all of these things in an early form, or, sort of like LCDs that are sort of staggered from another, all these different ideas for, tricks like that will, may find their way into some product that's created initially. And certainly those guys who are publishing those papers are working on these teams that work at these large organizations doing research and development.
And
right?
in fairness, I should say that it's great that they're allowed to publish their work.
Yeah, no, that is a great thing. Yeah, as a time-tested academic for a long time, I totally am. Yeah, behind that.
Totally agree.
That open.
Yeah, of course, Microsoft research.
Openness of ideas, right?
I work in open source and at Google, so you probably know my opinion on Apple's approach.
I think we have a consensus on the panel about that.
Something about, I was going to ask you something about lenticular displays and AR and WebVR, but I completely forgot what it was.
Like, maybe each talk about what we're working on next?
Yeah, do that. Let's talk about your next project.
Sure. Yeah. So So I think the most exciting stuff for us is still in compression land, but looking back at the video case. So Alliance for Open Media has, I think, folks from Microsoft and maybe some other folks working on it. It's sort of our next approach on how to do better than VP9, do better than 265, really create a new standard for video compression. And the advantage here is really that we're getting a lot more companies involved than we've ever had before in any kind of open compression project. This isn't just sort of a bunch of folks developing something and dropping it in GitHub. This is, sort of Netflix, Amazon, and YouTube saying that they're going to be using it from day one. And I think what that means is, from sort of the perspective of guiding hardware development and guiding an ecosystem, this has the potential, it's a little early to say, but has the potential to really be a compression standard available for VR and sort of open up new resolutions and new sort of complexity than we've ever hit before.
James, before you answer, I remembered what I was going to say, and I think it applies to what you're maybe what you might speak to. But I don't necessarily see that all the Janus guys are putting on HMDs. So there's the two kinds. When you're a content producer, you're thinking about whether people are in your 360 video, your spherical video, going to put something on and get sick and turn around in their swivel chair, or if they're just going to look at it on YouTube and flick and drag, right? And a lot of your guys are just using it sort of like a WASD, like move around looking at your screen without a headset on at all. It's virtual reality, but in the sense of like a first-person shooter is maybe virtual reality. So how much does that matter to you, putting on a headset versus just going into deeper space of the web, like adding a Z-plane?
So, that's very much like an interface specific question, but it kind of focuses on our philosophy of trying to be a catch-all as much we can as where it makes sense. So, in terms of like the inputs, you can use keyboard or mouse or gamepad or the touch or the Vive, leap motion for hand tracking. And we look at incorporating all these technologies, but you can abstract and look one layer out and decide, they need a means to, navigate, at least in some basic sense. They need to have a means to interact in some basic sense. And you can find solutions that work or that cover that well. So like even me myself, when I'm actually using Janus, sometimes I might put on an HMD but not actually have the gamepad or controllers, but I can use the keyboard and mouse just fine. So it's funny, different people prefer different sort of combinations of hardware, what they're comfortable with. That said, though, the situation is gray. Obviously, like you mentioned, planning that. Someone who's doing film and they're really concerned with what's the experience going to be like is incredibly concerned with making sure that it's appreciated fully and it's not swiping to the right and spinning this thing around on a phone. This is not at all anywhere near the intended experience. I think it's just adopting technologies and incorporating things when you can and as best they make sense. So, we've iterated on like the touch and Vive controller scheme like numerous times as a result of like thinking this will be the controls that nail it. Then we kind of go and test, and for a lot of people, it's actually not the ideal thing. And you got to go back and then kind of rethink. It's like, okay, well, what fundamentally do people need to do? And then really try to focus on something reasonable across your device range for those things.
Eduardo, if you take away the HMD component and you don't have to worry about making people sick, does it make your work obsolete, or does it still matter if it's just people doing WASD kind of controls? Is your cloud-based mobile computing, because it's mobile, right? Is it predicated that that person is putting it on their face?
No, it doesn't have to be on their face. So graphics is just one part of the equation. So especially if you go and think not only about VR and you think about maybe like mixed reality, augmented reality, then you have many other tasks that are hard to do in the phone, right? So let's say that you want to do recognition of any arbitrary object and you want to do overlays that help people do tasks, right? So all this machine learning for recognizing objects, for tracking, for giving you hints and things like that, all of that is not something that you can do easily in the phone, and it's something that will be very power consuming, right? So even if you don't have like your phone on your face, like the amount of power that your display consumes is still substantial. So I believe that the cloud can assist the phone in many ways to reduce the power it consumes and make your experience last longer. So yeah, I guess having it on your face makes the requirements higher, but even if you can have your AR experience or VR experience outside of your head, still there is a lot of work to do on the cloud to make things last longer.
How close are we to seeing something from you guys get into like the market? Is it already being kind of sent out, or are you just very much in the research phase?
Most of the work I have done is on the research space, but I'm on discussions with product groups on like some of the technologies that have been built. So it's hard for me to say a date, but it's because it's early. It's probably like maybe like a 2 or 3 more years before like the stuff I'm working on sees the light.
And I'm just going to go back to my eyebrow raise. You said the word Xbox. What was the Xbox part that you were talking about with VR and mobile VR? Anything?
That you can talk about?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what's going through your mind right now. NDA. Well, Microsoft didn't say that Xbox was going to go into VR in the next iteration, or this just the sort of sub Xbox One product that was released. Said, no, we're not doing it. But they are. Anyways, maybe we won't talk about that right now because it's a whole digression. But Bernie, what do you think about the flick and drag idea of VR versus putting it on your face?
From my perspective, I'm all in on immersion. I think trying to support, and no disrespect to anyone who's doing it, like I know James is, I think trying to support both a 2D desktop mode and an immersive mode is a lot of work, and I'm not sure it's worthwhile. I think we need to bite the bullet and say we're designing for immersion. We're designing immersive environments where you have a full position tracking, where you have your hands, where you can interact with things and with each other. Rather than trying to support the past, we should be looking to the future. That's my own personal feeling.
Okay, I'm gonna duck while the blood flies right now.
So, I mean, I mentioned like the idea of having a spectrum of devices, but there's also a spectrum of the user in terms of their skills and how comfortable they are. So you have a basic user and an advanced user, and so for a basic user, you obviously need some very simple system. All they want to do is they want to navigate, they want to move, and they want to have basic interaction, and then that is all. And then you also have this advanced category of user who is the power user, the builder, the developer or something, and they could be comfortable with an elaborate set of VR-centric controls, but they're probably also equally happy thinking, well, if I'm going to do productive work, this keyboard mouse combination kind of hits this sort of human factor local optima in terms of what you're capable of that can't kind of be denied, and is unlikely to change into the future.
Maybe. I'm optimistic. I mean, I've done a lot of work over the years, and let me tell you, trying to even arrange objects in 3D space without stereo depth is really hard, because you're constantly looking at it from the left and moving a little bit, looking from the right, trying to get it in the right place. That's tedious. I would much rather pick up an object like this, right? Pick up this object and put it where I want it, seeing it stereoscopically, using my hands, rather than a keyboard, mouse, this kind of stuff. It's just... I think the future is definitely immersive interfaces, even for advanced power users.
I mean, certainly for any sort of coordination sort of based task where you want to manipulate an object in local space. But if you kind of look in the greater picture and how a lot of geometries model it and all the CAD modeling software and all that offers you this power to build and to create, and which we kind of employ downstream, is that those interfaces are tend to be more 2D in nature, that you can having to carry this thing.
But that's an artifact of the past. I mean, they're 2D because they could only be 2D because that's all we had. If you look at something like Oculus Medium, for example, where you can actually sculpt objects interactively in 3D space, that's so much easier than using Blender or Maya or Max, especially for the vast majority of users who are not going to be, 3D artists. You're going to be regular people who just want to make something simple. I think a lot of content creation is going to come from actually doing it in VR, not from doing it on a clunky 2D interface.
I'm going to see if I can play mediator a little bit and revisit the discussion I had with Bernie earlier, which is I think I completely believe that there are a lot of interactions where you absolutely want to have a sort of restriction on the types of devices and the types of interactions that you're working with and commit to immersion. Right? You can imagine sort of top-tier games, some of the workstation demos that we were seeing earlier. Absolutely. I think when we think about, what is it that we're trying to really get to, and if it's interesting experiences for the most number of people, there is an entire world of interactions that are available, sort of in this sort of either degraded mindset, if you want to think of it as like falling back naturally to other platforms, or just to say that there's something interesting to be had in sort of this 2D world. But the number of users who get affected by that type of interaction is astounding, right? I mean, talked about cardboard briefly as sort of like 2 years old, and that's absolutely true. That it's sort of a thing of the past. But as much as cardboard seemed like it was sort of like a novelty and not particularly a platform, the number of people who used it was astonishing, right? I mean, it was a lot more than the number of folks who actually ended up buying a headset. And so if that is going to be someone's first taste of a VR experience, then what are we going to offer them next? I think that's a valid question to ask, and I think it's worth building for that world as well.
I'm just going to add, do you want to say something, Eduardo?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and just make a comment on that philosophical question. I believe that the killer app is exactly the kind of interactions when, like in this case, when you're creating content, it's just so much better to do it in the immersive world, in the VR headset. And I think that's the kind of experience that is going to drive people en masse to use these kind of devices. It's only when you have like a compelling reason to use this that you're going to go and buy it and go out on your way and put it on.
Raphael Brown, who is not able to join us, he got stuck in San Francisco. He was on this panel because his company, Digital Myths, he worked with Carmack at ID way back in the day. They're only working on a vertical, which is how do I take an object and successfully hand it over to you in real time in VR? Which I think, at first I was like, that's it? And that's a huge, huge problem. How do you, reliably transfer items from one person in one part of the world to another and without latency, without lag, and that other person receives that object? So he's missing, but in spirit to that. Guys, I have to close this down because this could go on forever, and I would love to be at that eternal conversation. So hopefully you guys will continue the conversation, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.